Chapter 32, You Did Well. Dust drifted in their vicinity, and numerous cracks were carved on the ground. Where the floating asteroid-like object that had crashed was a large crater, and on top of that laid a gigantic golem. Shia, who had been tasked with carrying the unconscious Yoma, hopped on top of Milady Golem, where she let out a scream of accomplishment. Rinku narrowed his eyes in admiration, while Yue looked at her with gentle eyes. Rinku, you did it, Shia. You were filled with great vigor today. Yoma might start treating you better now. Yue, you've worked hard. Shia let out a big smile as she looked down at Rinku and Yue. Even with her exhausted appearance, Rinku and Yue's praise made Shia feel shy. Actually, until just recently she didn't think anything about battle. She only single-mindedly wanted to stand on the same stage as the others and to always be together with them. Those were Shia's wishes. With those deep and strong wishes, Shia faced one of the 7 great dungeons trial with her potential. Milady, Tilda, although it's such a good atmosphere, Tilda, it's about to get dangerous for me, so can I have some of your time, Tilda? It was a truly familiar voice. The party let out ha, then looked at Milady Golem. Unbeknownst to them, the light in her eyes that was previously gone has returned. Immediately, the party jumped back to put their distance. Because they were certain that her core was destroyed, they could only take stances with wariness in their minds. Milady, wait a sec, it's okay, Tilda. The trial was cleared. It's your victory. Because there is some power left inside the core's fragments, I wanted some time to talk, Tilda, it'll only take a few minutes. As if to prove those words, Milady Golem was completely unmoving, while the lights in her eyes parts were repeatedly blinking. It seemed to disappear at any moment. That's why, it must have been true when she said she only needed a few minutes. Rinku relaxed his mind and continued to talk to Milady Golem. Rinku, so. What is it? Undead. To be incapable of reading the mood even after death. Although it's regrettable for the future, liberators, maybe I should help you pass on. Milady, wah, stop it, Tilda, what's with that obvious harassment? That was completely unpleasant. Rinku, well. I won't hear anything about killing those shitty bastards, you know. Toward Rinku's authoritative speech, Milady somehow gave out an atmosphere as if she wryly smiled. Milady, I won't say that. That's not necessary after all. What I want to talk about is more like advice. Even if there is no Age of Gods magic that you're looking for in the dungeons you visit, try to obtain all of the Age of Gods magics, because they are necessary for your wish. Maybe because Milady's power was almost exhausted, her words gradually became blurred and more intermittent. But, without worrying about that, Rinku told her his problem. Rinku, all of them ha, then tell us the locations of the other dungeons. Because they were lost in legend, I truly don't know any more of it. Milady, there is that. I see, the other dungeons' locations are unknown. It's been a long time after all. The locations are. Gradually, Milady Golem started to lose the power in her voice. Toward her voice that somehow contained sentimentality, Yue and Shia wore serious expressions. After a long time, for her duty, rather for the sake of her wish. To have put her soul inside a vessel was an act that made them stare at her with respect. Milady slowly talked about the whereabouts of the remaining 7 great dungeons. Inside her words was a place that seemed to surprise them. Milady, that's all, good luck. Rinku, you've become completely modest. What happened to those annoying lines and that infuriating tone? Just as Rinku had said, the current Milady gave out an atmosphere as if she had no relation to the Milady that prepared those annoying sentences inside this dungeon, with a completely different tone, filled with sincerity and seriousness. She had also displayed it before the fight when she wanted to hear Rinku's objectives. This was probably her real self. It was as if there was no more need to hide it before she completely disappeared. Milady, I am sorry, Tilda. But, those shitty bastards were truly unpleasant fellows. They only say unpleasant things. That's why, even just a little. I want you to get accustomed to it. Rinku, oi, you. I already said I won't defeat the gods. That's why, don't say it as if I'll fight against those guys. Toward Rinku's unpleased voice, Milady replied with unexpected conviction and seriousness. Milady, you'll surely fight them. As long as you are you. For sure, you'll kill those gods. At least, he will. Milady spoke in regards to Yoma, who was unconscious and unable to rebut Milady's statement about him. Rinku, I don't understand what you mean. Well, if they try to obstruct my path, then it can't be helped. Plus, I highly doubt Yoma would want to put in the effort to fight gods. Rinku was somewhat perplexed. Milady, who had seen his appearance, let out a joyful laugh. Milady, foo-foo. That's good. It's okay as long as you live like that. Your choice will surely be the best for this world. Afterwards, Milady Golem's body was wrapped in a pale light and glowed. As if it became fireflies, the light separated into smaller lights and ascended towards heaven. It was similar to how a dead soul ascends to heaven. A very, very mysterious scene. Suddenly, the party noticed a light shoot out from a corner of the wall. They moved toward it. They jumped onto the floating block on the upper part of the wall, so the party jumped onto the same block. Then, when they landed, the floating block that served as their foothold started to move. It carried Hajime and his party toward the shining wall. The floating block suddenly transported the party. Shia was surprised while Yue tilted her head in doubt. Somehow Rinku wore an unpleased expression as he told Shia to keep a hold of Yoma. They advanced toward the shining wall in 10 seconds and completely stopped 5 meters in front of it. Following that, the shining wall, as if waiting for that timing, started to lose its radiance. With a sound, the part of the wall that was still shining started to split. In its place, a passage with glossy white walls appeared. The floating block the party were on advanced into the passage. Apparently, they were going into Milady Raisin's dwelling. After advancing for a while, just like the door leading to Oscar's dwelling inside Orca's great dungeon, there was a wall with the same 7 distinct patterns engraved on them. The party approached the door and, as if the wall was waiting for that exact timing, the wall slid to the sides and they advanced towards the interior. The floating block was advancing without stopping towards the wall on the other side. Slipping through from the wall on the other side was Milady, Yahoo, short time no see. It's Milady. A small Milady Golem. Milady, come on, look. I already knew this might happen. Yue and Shia were speechless. Rinku, who already expected this, showed a fed-up expression. Rinku was able to expect this because he saw through that both the frivolous Milady and the serious Milady were the real her. Those annoying sentences and unpleasant traps were not at a level a truly serious person could conceive. Also, Milady chose to leave her own soul to test the challenges herself. That's why it was impossible for her to pass on after being defeated just once by a challenger. If that truly happened, the last trial would be gone after just one clearing. Because of that, Rinku expected that Milady herself wouldn't disappear even after Milady Golem was destroyed. His expectations became conviction when the floating block started to move to guide the party. After all, Milady was the only one that could move the floating block. Toward Yue and Shia, who were looking down silently, Milady talked to them with a very casual tone. Milady, isn't the tension too low, Tilda? It's okay to be more surprised, you know, Tilda. Ah, is it that you are so surprised that you can't say anything? If that's so, then my surprise is a big success. The small Milady Golem was designed to be more human-like compared to the gigantic one. It had a slender body clad in a milk white, long robe while wearing a white mask. Its Nico mark was slightly irritating. Along with Milady's words that ended with Kira. A twinkling star, she came in front of the party. Even now, Yue and Shia looked down, their expressions hidden behind their bangs. Because he could read the development that might happen next, Rinku took a step back after grabbing Yoma off of Shia's back. It wasn't known if it came from Yue or Shia, but a question was muttered. Before. Milady, NN Tilda. A while ago. Ah, did you really think I was gone? No way, no Tilda way. That's impossible, Tilda. Mini Milady's tension rolled up. It shot up in proportion with their annoyance. In front of that Mini Milady, Yue thrust out her hand while Shia prepared Doryuken. As expected, Mini Milady stopped moving while thinking if she had overdone it. Towards Yue and Shia, who were swaying as they approached her, Mini Milady moved her head in hesitation, then said the words she had decided in her mind. Yue, die. Shia, please die. Milady, wait. Please wait. This body is weak. It'll be truly bad if you destroy it. Please calm down. I will apologize. For a while, Dotabata, Dokanbaki, sounds of destruction and, a scream could be heard. Rinku, who ignored those sounds, was observing the room. The room was white all over. There was nothing except a magic circle that was carved on the floor in the center of the room. The other one was a door-like thing on one part of the wall. Rinku guessed that Milady's dwelling was on the other side of it. Rinku slowly approached the magic circle, then arbitrarily examined it. Mini Milady saw that and panicked while drawing near Rinku. From behind her, the expressionless vampire princess and rabbit ears approached while making do-do-do-do sound effects. Milady, you tilde it's not good to examine it without permission. Rather, they're your companions. Please don't just ignore them, stop them. While saying those complaints, Mini Milady hid behind Rinku and made him into a shield against the devil duo. Yue, Rinku, please move aside, I won't kill her. Xia, please stand back Rinku. I will kill her. Here and now. Rinku, surely, I never thought of hearing those materials at this timing. Rather, stop playing around and do it already. Rinku gave his advice with a somewhat amazed expression at Xia and Yue's softness. Behind him, Mini Milady said, that's right, but seriously. Only to get iron-clawed by his artificial arm. He ignored the Nico mark that was distorted into a bitter expression. Just as it is, he put more power and mechameki, sounds of something cracking came from Mini Milady's head. Rinku, it would become an unpleasant design if this keeps up, so hand over the Age of God's magic already. Rinku, tilde, did you notice your speech and behavior are villain-like? Affirmative. I'll immediately hand it over. That's why, stop. I truly will break if this keeps up. Maybe because their bitterness had decreased having seen Mini Milady being capable of little more than flailing around, Yue and Xia regained their composure. Mini Milady, who understood that she truly would be destroyed if she kept joking around, finally began to activate the magic circle. The party entered the magic circle. This time, because Milady herself knew they cleared the trial, there was no need to search their memories like that time in the Orcus Great Dungeon, and the information on how to use the Age of God's magic were directly carved into their brains. Although Rinku and Yue, who already experienced this, didn't show any reaction, Xia, who experienced this for the first time, Bakun, jumped. The carving ended after a few seconds. The party easily obtained Milady Raisin's Age of God's magic. Rinku, this is magic to manipulate gravity as expected. Milady, that's ReGHT. Milady Chan's magic is gravity magic. Use it well, is what I wanted to say, but you and the Usagi Chan don't have the aptitude. It was at a level that even I was surprised by it. Yue, how noisy. I have understood that much. Just as Mini Milady said, Rinku and Xia, who had the information of gravity magic carved into their brain, were unable to fully use it. It's the same case as how Yue is only able to use a little of creation magic, it was a matter of aptitude. Milady, well, Usagi-chan should be able to use it if it's only to adjust weight. For you, because you can use creation magic, just do something about it yourself. Blonde-chan alone has the aptitude. With training, you can master how to use it. However, I'd be careful with the sleeping one, he might destroy large fields of areas if he gets too carried away. Having heard Mini Milady's somewhat serious explanation, Rinku could only shrug his shoulders, while Yue was nodding, and Xia was broken-hearted. It was because she was judged to have no aptitude for the Age of God's magic that she had finally obtained. She could only use it to adjust her weight. She was truly disappointed. Moreover, it was out of question to make herself heavier, but there was also a problem to make herself lighter. If she was negligent, it would only make her figure bad. Rather, burdened by the demerits, Xia could only feel depressed. Having cast a skeptical gaze toward the depressed Xia, Rinku immediately made further demands. There was no need to be reserved at all. Rinku, oi, Milady. Pass us the proof already. Then, give me all of your convenient artifacts and all of the unusual materials you have, such as the induction stone. Milady, aren't your lines completely the same as a robber's? Are you aware of it? From the distorted Nico-chan mask, a glare could be felt, but Rinku ignored that. Mini Milady pulled out a ring after rustling her chest pocket, then threw it towards Rinku. Rinku received it with a pashi sound. Raisin's ring had a design of upper and lower ellipses with a stake piercing them. Mini Milady immediately made a large amount of ores appear from empty space. She probably had a treasure box. The ores that were taken out was kept inside of it. Having seen that she obediently took him out, she probably had already decided to hand him over beforehand. That's because Milady was convinced Rinku and Yoma would fight those mad gods, that's why she wouldn't mind cooperation of this level. However, to not be satisfied by this much was Rinku's quality. After putting away all of the minerals inside his own treasure box, Rinku turned cold eyes toward Mini Milady. Rinku, oi, isn't that treasure box? If so, hand that over too. There are probably some artifacts inside. Milady, oi tilde. I won't hand over any more than this. The treasure box and the other artifacts are necessary to maintain the dungeon. Rinku, as if I care. Hand him over. Milady, oi, I said no. Because Rinku truly tried to snatch it away, Mini Milady retreated with an impatient expression. All of the artifacts that she owns were things necessary for the dungeon. Rather, they were only useful for that, so they were no use for Rinku to have them. Having heard that explanation. Rinku, how, I see. Then, hand those over. Milady, I already said I won't hand them. Moo, go back already. Currently, toward Rinku that impatiently approached, Mini Milady turned on her heel with all of her might and ran toward the wall, then elevating the floating block, she moved into the ceiling. Rinku, don't escape. For me, I just want to get the rewards for conquering the dungeon. That's a legitimate demand from me. Rinku, having the nerve to say that, please do something about your sense of value. To make me say something that Oh-chan usually said. While she continued looking at Rinku with a shocked expression, Yue and Xia, who still held a grudge after being toyed with, entered the fray. They narrowly encircled Milady. Although half of it was because she reaped what she had sown, Milady felt the other half was her former comrade's fault for making this dungeon. Milady, to have these abnormals as my first challenges. Moo, no more. I will send you outside by force. Don't come again. In front of the party, who seemed to jump out at any time, Mini Milady grasped the string that unbeknownst to them hung down from the ceiling, then Gui pulled it. For a moment, the party let out expressions wondering what she was doing. But, an unpleasant sound they've already heard before could be heard by their ears. That's right, it was the sound of an activated trap. At the moment the sound rang out, accompanied with a roar, water gushed out of the four walls with tremendous velocity. A large amount of water gushed out like a flash flood, not from the front but diagonally above, and the room was filled in no time with a rapid current. At the same time, the magic circle in the center of the room sunk like an antlion's nest. There was a hole in the center of it. The rapid current rushed toward the hole. Rinku, you. This is. Rinku, who had noticed something, stiffened for a moment. He instantly wore a distorted expression filled with humiliation. A white room with a hole in the middle of it, also a large amount of water whirled and flowed into it. That's right, this was just like a toilet. Milady, unpleasant things should be flushed. Mini Milady gave out a wink. Yue immediately tried using magic to jump up. Because there was an Age of Gods magic circle, there was no magic power disintegration. That's why, even with only a little amount of magic power left, Yue could use magic to help everyone escape the rapid current. The party was swept by the rapid current into the hole. A moment before they entered the hole, only Rinku tried to retaliate by throwing something. Along with the party that were flushed into the hole, the water flowed out at the same speed, then the floor returned and the room regained its former form. On the other side, the party that got flushed like filth was swept into the tunnel-like place by the rapid current at tremendous speed. It wasn't a place where you could breathe either, so they could only advance while submerged in the water. Somehow, although unskillfully, they desperately tried to control their bodies so they wouldn't crash into the wall and lose consciousness. Then, at that time, in the view of the party, many shadows passed them by. Those were fishes. It seemed the place they were swept into was an underground vein that connected to rivers and lakes. However, unlike the party who were washed away, the fishes were boldly swimming inside the rapid current and came to pass them by. Unbeknownst to them, one of the fishes swam beside Xia's face, who had stopped her desperation to breathe. Somehow, that fish looked toward Xia. There were eyes. The fish. No, the human-faced fish had oldman-like eyes. Because it probably didn't know how to speak, it didn't say anything. In conclusion, Xia met the eyes of the human-faced fish. The old man-like face of the human-faced fish displayed impudence and lethargic feelings. Xia, who was surprised, opened her eyes wide. She panically tried to cover her mouth with her hands after unintentionally letting out her breath. However, she was so surprised she didn't avert her gaze. Xia and the old man, fish, continued to advance inside the rapid current while staring at each other. And, the flow of time that seemed to continue forever between Xia and the old man, fish, was abruptly ended. A voice resounded inside Xia's head. Fish, just what are you looking at? That was added with a click of the tongue. This time Xia was unable to endure any longer. Inside the water, she grandly exhaled. Certainly, the old man, fish, might be a kind of demonic beast. It probably had the special magic similar to telepathy. But, without being able to confirm it, the old man, fish, started to swim through the rapid current and went ahead with surprising agility. What it left behind was a rabbit-eared girl who lost her power while displaying the whites of her eyes as they were shot out of the body of water. Rinku, that was awful. I will surely destroy that guy next time. Yue, Shia. Are you okay? Where's Yoma? Yue, I am okay. Having somehow managed to get into the water's surface, Rinku confirmed the other's safety after cursing. However, only Yue replied to him. Rinku, Shia. Oi, Shia. Answer me. Yue, Shia, where are you? Even as they called out to her, there was no sign of her or Yoma in the surroundings. Rinku hurriedly dived underwater to search for her. Then, as he thought, Shia, alongside Yoma, had sunk to the bottom. Having lost her consciousness, she was unable to float because of Doryuken's weight. Rinku took out a compressed super-heavy mineral from treasure box and used it as a weight replacement to immediately dive, then he carried Shia and Yoma up. He went ashore while dragging Shia. Shia was laid upside down, her face was pale with the whites of her eyes showing, while her breathing and pulse stopped. Maybe because she saw something unpleasant, she had lost consciousness with her face looking like it had a cramp. Rinku, Yue, do CPR on Shia while I tend to Yoma. Yue, see, what? Rinku, Atilda, like I said, secure her breathing. Having seen Shia's and Yoma's condition, he told Yue to do CPR, but Yue didn't seem to understand what he was asking of her. In this world, there was probably no such thing as CPR. Because there was no wound, drinking the holy water wouldn't help, and would just hydrate her even more. Yue was weak at healing magic, she couldn't possibly know any magic that was capable of making Shia or Yoma let out water or to pinpoint massage her heart. Although the exact moment when she lost her consciousness wasn't known, there was no time to argue. Rinku, with grim determination, performed CPR and chest compressions to the unconscious Shia, and when she came to, immediately did the same to Yoma, who did begin to start breathing again, but remained unconscious. Chapter 33, Reunion at Lakeside Town. The party had found themselves back in Brook Town, where they had decided to stay the night. They were all wet and cold. They entered the inn and Rinku immediately told them what they needed. Rinku, 2 rooms, one with 2 beds and the other only one. Shia, Rinku, why not just the 1 room with 2 beds? Rinku, absolutely not. Shia, and why not? Rinku, you'll probably assault Yoma while he's unconscious. Yoma was still unconscious as Rinku was carrying him on his back. Shia tried to argue her way into sharing a room with the others, but eventually fell in defeat as she realized there was no way to successfully convince them. The following morning, Yoma was up all cheery and energetic as he always was. Rinku began to brief everyone on the plan going forward. They planned to move before sunrise and to prepare to camp before sunset. Everyone were in agreement as they headed off to Uran. Eventually, 3 days had passed, the halfway point in Rinku's mind. The party were 3 days away from Lakeside Town. Only half the travel distance remained. So far no incidents had occurred during their journey, it was truly peaceful. Even today, nothing special happened as they prepared to camp. Regarding meals, the adventurers were eating by themselves. They had to eat while minding their surroundings, that's why, as escorts, they couldn't settle down when eating together. It also seemed to be the rule to eat on their own. Additionally, when on a mission, the adventurers only eat cruel, simple meals. In a way, preparing tasty meals would only increase their luggage, and would disturb them in emergency situations. Because of that, it became a theory that after they've arrived at a town they would eat tasty meals until their stomachs were full, as their reward. The party had finally arrived at Lakeside Town. There were 6 reception desks in Urn's eastern gate. The goods that were brought would be checked there. The party were queuing in one of the rows. It would take a while until their turn. Aiko, there's no clue today, too. Shimizu, where on earth did you go? With her shoulders dropping dejectedly, the person who was walking through Lakeside Town's main street was one of the summoned ones, the teacher, Aiko Hatayama. Her usual cheerfulness was gone. Currently, she was tortured with anxiety and worry, while a gloomy atmosphere hung around her. Somehow the main street's color, and even the streetlights were dimmer than usual. David, Aiko, don't be so disappointed. We still don't know anything. It's enough to just think he is safe. What can you do if you don't even believe? Yuka, that's right, Ai-sensei. Shimizu's room didn't seem to be attacked. So isn't the probability of him going out on his own be higher? Please stop thinking of just bad things. Because Aiko was low-spirited, the commander of Aiko's exclusive bodyguards, David, and her student, Yuka, called out to her. In her surroundings were the familiar knights and students. They were also severely worried about Aiko and tried to talk to her. One of the classmates, Shimizu Yukitoshi, had disappeared for a little over 2 weeks. Aiko and the others had tried to search for him, leaving no stone unturned. However, his whereabouts were still unknown. There had been no sightings in this town, so they had sent messengers to the other towns and villages in the vicinity, but in the end their efforts were still in vain. Although, at first they thought he was involved in an accident, Shimizu's room was clean. Shimizu himself was a dark magician, a class that possessed high aptitude toward dark magic. He also had high aptitude in other magic systems, that was why he couldn't be done in by the neighborhood thugs. A lot of them thought he left voluntarily. Moreover, Shimizu was an obedient indoor type who had low sociability. Even among the classmates he didn't have an especially close friend. It was also surprising that he wanted to be Aiko's bodyguard. Because of that, other than Aiko, the students were sure of his safety. They were more concerned about Aiko, who became more low-spirited as the days passed. There was no need to say how worried her bodyguard knights were. Incidentally, they had reported it to the kingdom and church, and it seemed like a search party they had organized was coming. Shimizu was a summoned one with talent in magic, unlike the episode with Rinku and Yoma in which the top management didn't even take an optimistic view. The search party would arrive in another 2 to 3 days. Because words of concern came one after another, Aiko mentally hit herself. Whether he was involved in an incident or voluntarily disappeared, didn't matter, it didn't change the fact that it worried her. However, she must put it aside for now. Now her duty was to cheer up the other students at her side. That's why, I am these children's teacher. Aiko took a deep breath then slapped her cheeks with her hands to recover her spirit. Aiko, everyone, I am sorry for worrying you. It's just as you said. Nothing would be solved by brooding over it. Shimizu is an excellent magic user. He'll surely be okay. Now, let us believe he is safe. Now, for today's dinner. Let's eat our fill and prepare for tomorrow. Although they knew she was overdoing it, the students obediently replied to her with a shout as they cheered up. The knights were also pleased with her appearance. Karan Karan. When that sound rang out, the door of the inn Aiko and the others were staying at opened. It was the #1 inn in Lakeside Town. Its name was Water Fairy Inn. A long time ago, a pair of husband and wife fairies stayed in Aldair Lake, and that was the origin of its name. Aldair Lake was the lake boasted as the largest in the continent, and located on the outskirts of Al Town. Its size was about 4 times that of Lake Biwa in Japan. The first floor of Water Fairy Inn was a restaurant. It served dishes that were also Lakeside Town's specialty products. The interior was calming, there were tables and bar counter that gave out a dignified atmosphere. Their ornaments were made with detail in mind, but did not stand out. Moreover, there was a modest chandelier on the ceiling, and flowers were arranged to add on to the calm atmosphere. It made one remember the words, well established, an inn where one could feel its history. In the beginning, Aiko and her students weren't able to calm down because the inn was too high class. It was impossible for Aiko and her student to stay at an ordinary inn because of their reputation, since people began to call them God's Apostles and Goddess of Good Harvest. After some persuasion from the knights, they agreed to stay at this place while they were in Lakeside Town. In fact, they had spent time in one of the luxurious rooms of the royal palace, so Aiko and her students had gradually become accustomed to it. Now the inn had become a place where they could truly relax. For Aiko and the others who came back exhausted from farmland improvement and in search of Shimizu, this inn's dishes were their only daily enjoyment. All of them were seated in VIP seats in the innermost section of the inn, as they enjoyed today's dinner. The students' tension was raised every night because of the dishes closely resembled those from Earth. Although there were slight differences in appearance and taste, the concept itself closely resembled their counterparts on Earth. The abundance of ingredient was one of the reasons that increased the quality of Lakeside Town's dishes. Other than the rice, there were fishes from Aldair Lake, in addition to herbs and spices from the mountain range area. Although Aiko and her students were still seated, the bodyguard knights commanded by David and currently eating with them let out "How," with a half-admiration-filled and half-interested tone. Even among the guild staff members, the head of Uran branch was considered first class. For someone to be appointed to accept a request from that branch head meant that they were capable of clearing something only powerful people could accomplish. Their curiosity was aroused because they wanted to fight in the same battle as such people. Inside the knights' heads, they were listed the famous gold-class adventurers. Aiko and her students were looking at the unusual chatter of David and the knights, then they began to hear voices from the stair connected to second floor. They were the voices of 2 boys and 2 girls. It seemed like one of the girls was complaining to one of the boys. "Owner, speak of the devils. It is them, Mr. Knights. If you want to talk to them, please do it now because they're going to leave tomorrow morning. Aiko, I see, I understand. But, those are fairly young voices. Are there any gold class that young? David and the knights had already memorized the famous gold class in their minds, but because there was no one with such young voices. Some of them looked at each other with perplexed expressions. While they were in a state of confusion, the quartet were approaching while talking. The seats where Aiko and the others sat were the innermost seats enclosed by walls on 3 sides. It was a place where they could look anywhere inside the restaurant. For now, it was made into a private room with the use of the curtain. Needless to say, inside was the conspicuous Aiko's party, was Aiko, the one hailed as the goddess of good harvest, which made him even more conspicuous. It was why they often used the curtain whenever they ate their meals. Even today, they closed the curtain so they wouldn't be seen. From the other side of the curtain, they could hear the conversation of the 2 boys and 2 girls. Shia, how many times I must say it until you understand? Please stop leaving me alone and create a world with just the 3 of you in it. It makes me feel really, really lonely. Did you hear me? Yoma. Yoma, yeah, I heard you, just ignoring you is all. Shia, did you hear what he just said, Yue? Rinku. Yoma just said something cold-hearted. Yue, Yoma, bad. Yoma let out a loud and mocking laugh at Shia's expense. Within their conversation, the names the girls said instantly rattled Aiko's heart. What did the girls just say? What was the boy called? This boy's voice, isn't it similar to those boys? Were the question that immediately floated into Aiko's mind. She stiffened as though something had tied her down, so she could only stare at the curtain. The same thing happened to Shinobi Yuka and other students by her side. In their minds, thoughts of a certain pair of boys who had disappeared into the abyss 4 months ago resurfaced. They were the ones who the classmates strongly believed to have died in this other world. The boys they wanted to forget, the DUP who stood out for better or for worse. Because of the abnormal expression on Aiko's and her students' faces, Foss and the knights tried calling out to them with dumbfounded gazes, but no one reacted. The knights were wondering what on earth had happened as they looked at their faces. Then, Aiko blurted out a name. Aiko, Rinku. Yoma. Because of the word she unconsciously let out, her body which had stiffened because of the unbelievable situation had regained its freedom. Aiko immediately stood up and her chair fell to the ground. She then pulled the curtain open, so hard it might tear. Shah! Exclamation mark. Because of the unexpected loud sound that came from when the curtain was pulled, the quartet were only able to look with stupefied expressions. Aiko shouted without confirming who the other person was. It was the name of her important student. Aiko, Rinku. Yoma. Rinku, Yoma, sensei, teach. In front of her, with his eye wide open in surprise, was an eye-patched, white-haired boy along with another boy with white hair wearing a blindfold with red markings on it. They looked completely different from the Rinku and Yoma in her memory. Not only their appearance, but their aura was also completely different. The Rinku and Yoma Aiko knew were boys who always daydreaming, gentle, loud, and kind. Actually, Aiko admitted that a wry smile fit the both of them, but it was her secret. However, the boys in front of her eyes had sharp eyes, clad with an unapproachable atmosphere. They were too different from her memory. If she passed by him inside the town, she was sure she wouldn't recognize the boys in front of her as Rinku Kagura and Yoma Najika. But if she looked carefully, their voice and face were the same as the one inside her memory. Above all, it was how the boys in front of her called her. That's right, it was Sensei. Aiko was convinced. Although their look and atmosphere had greatly changed, the boys in front of her were certainly her own students. Aiko, you're Rinku and Yoma, right? You're actually alive, right? Rinku, no, you got wrong people. Why? To meet the student who was thought to be dead was a miracle. Being deeply moved, her tear glands loosened, and Aiko's eyes became teary. Where was he until now? What on earth happened? I am truly glad that you were safe. Were only some of the many things she wanted to say, but couldn't. Even so, the reply to her desperate words was a completely unexpected answer. She unconsciously let out a stupid voice, and Aiko's tears were also withdrawn. She could only blankly stare at the boys who had begun to walk towards the exit. She quickly returned to her senses, and panicky ran after him while gripping onto where Yoma's left arm would have been before she grabbed nothing but the robe her was wearing. She began to freak out. Aiko, Yoma. Where is your arm? Wait. Please wait a second. Aren't you two Rinku Kagura and Yoma Najika? Didn't you just call me sensei? Just how is that the wrong person? Rinku, no, you heard it wrong. That was, right, it was a dialect meaning small. Yoma, man did that excuse suck. Rinku, Yoma. Aiko, that's extremely rude. Why are you trying to deceive me? That appearance too, did something happen? What are you doing in this place? Why didn't you immediately come back to everyone? Boys. Please answer. I won't let you deceive me. Aiko's angry voice resounded inside the restaurant. Several people and guests looked at the rumored goddess of good harvest as she caught and shouted at a man. The students who had seen Yoma and Rinku's appearance had shocked expressions as they couldn't believe what was in front of them. Half of it was because they were alive, while the other half was because of the drastic change to their appearance and atmosphere. However, they didn't know what they should do, so they could only blankly look at Aiko, Rinku and Yoma. Finally, Yoma let out a sigh, wrapping his arm over Rinku. Yoma, there's no point in hiding it now, that's right. It is us, your beloved long-lost students Rinku Kagura and Yoma Najika. Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. That's right. It is us, your beloved long-lost students Rinku Kagura and Yoma Najika. Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. On the other side, although Rinku looked calm, his mind was attacked by petty panic. In the town he came to, after accepting the request from the guild's branch head, he got acquaintance by chance. He never thought there was a chance they would meet Aiko and their classmates again. Yue, let go, Rinku and Yoma are troubled. Aiko, what are you? Currently, I am trying to have an important talk with them. Yue, then, calm down a little. Because the beautiful girl stared at her with cool eyes, Aiko slightly flinched. There wasn't much of a height difference between the two. Normally, it would be labeled as a fight between kids. However, Aiko was actually younger by age, and Yue wore a bewitching atmosphere despite her appearance. No matter who saw it, they looked like an adult and an angry child. Aiko was wary of Yue, so she quietly backed away from the boys with blushing cheeks because of her own words and the way she got mad at him. As she straightened her back to show her dignity as an adult, although it was too late, Aiko was just like a child doing a stretch. Rinku, long time no see, was Aiko. Aiko, I knew it was you boys. You're actually alive. Aiko's eyes became teary again, but the boys didn't think anything about it as Rinku shrugged his shoulders. Rinku, something like that. After a lot happened, we're somehow still alive. Aiko, I am glad. I truly am glad. After they took a glance at Aiko, who was unable to say more than those words, they all went to the nearest table and sat down. Having seen him, Yue and Shia also sat. Shia was somewhat perplexed. Aiko and the others were astonished by the boy's sudden action. Rinku had regained his composure and he ignored the surroundings, only to beckon towards Foss, who had watched how the situation progressed while he stood behind the students. In the beginning, Shia was timidly sneaking glances at Aiko and the others. However, naturally, there was no time for them to wait. Aiko, who was dumbfounded again by how they seated themselves at a nearby table and began to order, returned her to her senses and she approached their table. Aiko, boys, our talk isn't over. Just how can you start to order as if it were the most natural thing in the world? In the first place, just who are these girls? What Aiko had said represented the feelings of everyone around them. The knights who guessed they were Aiko's student, who they heard had died 4 months ago, the students who waited behind Aiko, and everyone else were nodding and they waited for their answer. Rinku frowned because of it would be an annoyance. Because he thought he couldn't have a calm meal thanks to Aiko, who would keep waiting until he answers her questions even as they ate, he reluctantly turned his glance toward Aiko. Rinku, I have come here in just a single day, without stopping, because of a request. That's why I am hungry, so just let me eat my meal. Also, these are. Rinku turned his glance towards Yue and Shia. And these two, before Rinku could say it, began an impactful introduction towards Aiko and the others. Aiko somewhat stammered said, as she alternately looked between them and the two beautiful girls. It seemed she couldn't process the information. The students behind her were also perplexed. Well, the male students' expressions said, that can't be. As they restlessly looked between Yue and Shia. Gradually, their face reddened as they were charmed by their beauty. Yoma, Rinku and Yue are bumping it in the sheets, but Shia has no real relationship with any of us. Shia, Yoma, that is so cruel. Aiko had a dazed expression hearing Yoma and Shia go at it back and forth as Rinku and Yue eat quietly. Chapter 34, Aiko's Worries. Because of Aiko's roar, the party were guided to a VIP seat, away from the eyes of the other guests. Then, Aiko, Sonobe Yuka, and other students bombarded him with questions. However, Rinku and Yoma were focused on the nilshasir, this world's version of curry, in front of their eyes. Rinku answered them in a daze as Yoma began to eat. Aiko, you fell from that bridge, what happened afterwards? Rinku, we worked hard. Aiko, why did your hair turn white? Rinku, we worked hard. Aiko, what happened to your eye and why is Yoma wearing a blindfold and missing an arm? Rinku, we worked really hard. Aiko, why didn't you immediately return? Rinku, no reason to do so. After hearing that much, Aiko yelled angrily with her cheeks puffed. Aiko, please answer me seriously. Indeed, her being unable to show any intensity in that action was a sad thing. As usual, Rinku looked like a willow when the wind blew. Without matching her gaze, he deliciously enjoyed the nilshasir, while sometimes listening to Yue and Shia's quarrel. His face was full of satisfaction. Angered by their appearance, was the commander of Aiko's bodyguards, David. He couldn't endure the woman he fell for being ignored. That's why he threw his fist onto the table and a loud sound rang out. David, hey, you two. You're being asked a question by Aiko. Answer her seriously. As David slammed his fist on the ground, Yoma's food fell onto the table, causing him to pause for a moment. Rinku took a glance at David, then let out a sigh. Rinku, we're eating, learn some manners. His protest was completely ignored. However, David has great pride because, as a temple knight, he was entrusted as the commander of an important person's bodyguard, so he couldn't endure it and his face turned red. Following that, because Rinku wouldn't give him a clear answer, he changed his target as he turned to look at Shia. David, did you say learn some manners? That phrase, I return it back at you. To have a dirty animal share the same table as humans, you are the one who has no manners. Won't you at least chop off those ugly ears? She will look more human like that. Shia's body trembled as she was stared at with eyes full of disdain. This was the first time she had directly received discriminating words as a demi-human. Although she wanted to think nothing of it, she was slightly surprised by the attack. Even after she had got accustomed to the outside world, she could still feel the damage. Shia looked down depressedly. If she looked carefully, she could see that it wasn't limited to just David. Chase and the other knights also looked at Shia with the same eyes. No matter how intimate they were with Aiko and her students, they were temple and imperial knights. They were men from the Church of Saints and the kingdom, so their discrimination towards the demi-human race was strong. After all, the source of discrimination were the Church of Saints and the kingdom. Even though David and the knights were influenced by Aiko and could think for themselves, they wouldn't have changed after only a few months because this sense of value was not so shallow-rooted. Because it was something unreasonable, Aiko instinctively tried to protest. But before that, Yue, who grasped the downcast Shia's hand, directed a glare as cold as absolute zero at David. A cold gaze that seemed to be able to freeze one's body came from the highest class, bisque doll-like beautiful girl. David flinched for a moment, but became enraged when he saw that the pressure was coming from a girl with the appearance of a child. Usually, he wouldn't easily lose his temper, but the words he just spoke, and looking at his dear Aiko, he had lost it. David, what's with those eyes? That's rude. Even though you aren't a god's apostle, you're trying to oppose a temple knight. David spontaneously stood up. Although the vice commander Chase tried to stop him, faster than that, Yue's words clearly rang out in that uproar. Yue, a small man. Those were words of ridicule. Words that ridiculed how small his vessel was, to shout just because of a difference in race, and lose his temper when glared at by a girl. David was already lost in anger. As a man, being called small in front of Aiko drove him over the edge. David, you pagan. I'll send you to hell along with that animal. As he quietly muttered that without any expression, David reached for the sword by his side. Because the carnage appeared all too sudden, the students were flustered, while Aiko, Chase, and the knights were all trying to stop him. However, as though he didn't hear the surrounding voices, David finally slightly pulled the sword from its sheath. At the same time, Yoma, almighty push. A dry, explosive sound echoed inside Water Fairy Inn. At the same time, David, who was about to pounce at any time, was hit in the chest and got blown away. As it were, the back of David's head hit the wall behind him, hard, and a terrific sound resounded. His eyes turned white as he collapsed. The sword was released from David's hand and Gashan. It fell to the floor. No one was able to comprehend what had happened just now, and were all stunned. Their gazes turned to David, who collapsed with the whites of his eyes showing. Then someone was curious as to what had happened to emit such a large and explosive sound. It was Foss, who pulled the curtain. Following that, he became wide-eyed as he was stunned by the disastrous scene in front of him. On the other side, Aiko and the others were finally able to regain their senses when Foss entered. Their gazes, which were then directed toward David, were naturally drawn to the source of the explosive sound. In that place was something Aiko and her students had knowledge of, but had never actually seen. It was something from the other world, something completely unknown to the knights. There was the figure of Yoma, standing from where he was sitting, moving past Rinku to walk over to David. Although they didn't know the details, the knights had guessed it was Yoma's attack, so they simultaneously put their hands on their swords while letting out killing intent. However, what immediately followed was by violent killing intent incomparable to the knights. It was as though they were attacked by a hammer that fell from heaven, as the knights who began to stand were forced to sit back down into their seats. Although they weren't submerged in the killing intent, having felt the similar, much stronger pressure Yoma emitted, Aiko and the others turned pale as they trembled. Yoma lifted his blindfold to glare down at David, planting his foot on his chest that was still throbbing with pain from the almighty push. The sight of his eyes caused the female students to blush slightly. Yoma, I have no interest in any of you. I have never thought of wanting a relationship with you guys, the knights, my former classmates, none of y'all. Neither of us are gonna tell you a damn thing about what had happened to us or what we want to do. We're only here for work, so we'll resume our journey once it's over. That's where we say goodbye. If any of you get in my way, I'll kill you. Understand? Was what Rinku's eyes asked as he watched on, but no one could said anything. Immediately, he turned his gaze towards Chase and the knights, who desperately endured the pressure, and all they could do was slightly nod. Next, Rinku turned his gaze towards Aiko and her students. Aiko didn't say anything. No, more like she couldn't. It was not only because of the pressuring feelings that gushed out, but also because of Yoma's words, and how her students changed without her knowing. That was not something Aiko's pride could allow. Although there was no answer from Aiko, Rinku could somehow sympathize with her feelings, so he didn't force her for an answer. The other students were obviously frightened, so he guessed they wouldn't dare challenge him. With the tremendous feeling of oppression vanished, the knights collapsed and let out deep sighs. Aiko and her students were also exhausted and sat deeply on the chairs. As though nothing had happened, Rinku resumed his meal as Yoma put down his blindfold and talked to the depressed Shia. Yoma, you okay? Shia, why yeah, are my ears really that disgusting? Shia says, grabbing her ears and trying to hide them from embarrassment. Yoma then smiled, grabbing one of her ears and rubbing it between his thumb and index finger. Yoma, no, your ears are adorable. Shia, Yoma. Stop it. That's not fair. Yue, Rinku thinks they're cute. Rinku, how did you? Yoma bursted out laughing loudly. Yoma, you were awake for that. That's awesome. The awkward and strained atmosphere of massacre that floated in the air until now had dissipated as if it were an illusion. The atmosphere had mysteriously turned pink-colored, so Aiko and her students, even the knights, were blinking in amazement. For a while, they watched the party's love-hate comedy interaction. Chase, having realized the atmosphere had calmed down, started to heal David. At the same time, with his caution and hostility were subdued, he asked them with a smile. Apart from the two boys' circumstances, there was something he had to hear by all means. Chase, is it okay to call you Rinku and Yoma? About before, my commander had been rude. No matter what, we are Aiko's bodyguards after all, so we become oversensitive if it concerns her. Somehow, I would like for you to forgive us. Although Rinku wanted to interrupt him and say, how can oversensitivity turn into murder? But the word, murder, itself made him unable to say anything. That's why he just silently waved his hand to tell him to stop that. Because of this perfunctory attitude, Chase's eyebrows slightly twitched, but his poker face-like smile didn't crumble. Following that, with quick thinking, because he couldn't just leave it at that, he cut to the case about Yoma's eyes. Chase, Yoma, those eyes of yours, I can't say I've ever seen anything like it before, but by judging by the looks of your classmates, I assume you weren't born with them. How did you get them? Although he was smiling, Chase's eyes weren't. Judging from his words, since there wasn't the presence of magic being used, he thought it had a bow like pure physical mechanism and could be mass-produced. If so, it'd be a great help for the sake of dominating against enemies before war breaks out. However, the knights weren't a match for either of them, so he at least wanted to get information out of him. Yoma, no idea, just appeared in my face one day. Chase, either way, they seem to give you great power, a power like that would. Rinku, it could completely change the situation of the war in this world. Right. Especially if you can harness their power, if only you could get your hands on him, but you wouldn't try to steal his eyes, would you? Rinku's words had left him completely helpless. Those words seemed to be prepared beforehand. It was almost as if Rinku could read him like a book. Rinku, either way, even if you tried, you'd just die trying. But we aren't going to cooperate with you. Rinku's quiet words sent a chill toward Chase's whole body and he shut his mouth. Then, Aiko managed to intervene there. Aiko, Chase, the boys have their own intentions. Please don't force my students. Boys, please stop saying such extreme things. Be more peaceful. Also, are you seriously not coming back? Rinku, no, I don't want to return with you. Tomorrow morning, after I complete the request, I'll leave as is. Aiko, why? Aiko looked at the two boys with a pained expression. She wanted to know their reason, but Rinku finally rose from his seat before she could ask. Unbeknownst to them, Yue and Xia had also finished their meals. Although Aiko tried to stop them, they ignored her and climbed the stairs to the second floor, accompanied by Yue and Xia. At the time Aiko and the others were left behind, a subtle and indescribable atmosphere was in the air. They were glad the classmates they thought were dead was actually alive. But, for the person themselves, they seemed to have not even registered in their eyes. Moreover, they had become strong to the point that it was impossible to compare them to their past selves. They were not the same as the ones who was once called incompetent, in contempt as they looked at him from above. Moreover, about the contempt, they had pretended not to notice Hayama and his friends bullying them. Followed by that friendly fire incident, they could only feel more indebted because of their ambiguous attitude. As a result, no one could proactively reach out to them. Especially after Yoma's declaration. Aiko herself was greatly shaken by her students' change and angered by the current development in her mind, so she was unable to stop them. Chase, while he looked at the currently recovering David at the side, seemed to think of something. With their meals completely cooled, their appetites also disappeared. Without looking at the food in front of them, all of them began to deeply think about how they survived after they left them. Just what on earth could completely change a person like that? What did they think at that time when the friendly fire incident happened? What the current Rinku and Yoma thought of them? Most likely, they held a grudge against them. With those thoughts making revolutions in their minds, all of them became depressed, and the day was over. In the middle of the night. Surrounded by the night, they were completely exhausted. Both physically and mentally, thanks to the unexpected development. All of them fell asleep, but Aiko wasn't able to sleep even now. Aiko's room was a single room, so it was not a large one. A table set and bed with carved wooden feet, a small fireplace, and a leather sofa in front of it. In the winter, the flame would surely brighten the room, and the inn-guests would be warmed just by seeing it. Aiko was thinking about what happened earlier today. She watched the unlit fireplace while deeply entrusting her body to the sofa. The insides of Aiko's head was like an unarranged bookshelf, with all of that information in disorder. Even if she couldn't think about it, she wanted to think. And from then on, her head that ran round and around in circles didn't give out any constructive opinions at all. She recalled smiling when she found out her students were alive, then she could only knit her eyebrows because of their unamicable attitude. She had seen a glimpse of Yoma's power through David's speech and conduct. She thought they wouldn't have been able to survive if they didn't change, and how much hardship they must have experienced. At that point she could only let out a sigh because she couldn't help them at all. However, she recalled their interactions with the two girls. She thought they must have found companions he could trust, and she smiled again. And, suddenly, a voice rang out inside the room where there should be no one but her inside. Rinku, why do you keep changing your expression, was Aiko. Aiko turned around to the source of the voice while wide-eyed. There was Rinku who stood at the entrance door with his arms folded. Aiko was so surprised that she became tongue-tied, but somehow managed to speak. Aiko, Rinku. Why are you here, how? Rinku, even if you ask how, I just came through the door, no more no less. Aiko, but the lock. Rinku, my class is Transmutation Master, you know. Unlike the locks on Earth, I can open this kind of lock mechanism. Rinku lightly answered, which stunned Aiko for a while. Her heart loudly throbbed in surprise, and that somehow managed to calm her down. She frowned, then criticized him. Aiko, at such a time, moreover it's rude to suddenly barge into a woman's room without even a knock. To purposely open the lock. Just what do you want? Wait, where's Yoma? Well, I am sorry about that. I just didn't want anyone to know about this visit. I wanted to talk to you, but before, there were the fellows from the church and the kingdom, so I couldn't do it. After all, the contents of this talk might have angered those guys. And about Yoma, he didn't feel like coming. Aiko, why doesn't that surprise me? Wait, a talk. Rinku, it was okay to talk to me and the others. By chance, she thought they wanted to return with them, and Aiko's eyes shined in expectation. If it was a consultation from her student, then it was as though the room was a teacher's office. But her expectations were immediately denied by Rinku. Rinku, no, we don't want to return, you know. So stop looking at me with those eyes filled with expectation. What I want to talk about now is something I thought you would be the most calm to listen to it. After this talk, I'll leave what you want to do to your own. Having said that, Rinku began to talk about the story of liberators and the mad gods he heard from Oscar. Rinku obviously had his own reasons for telling Aiko this story. According to the gods' intentions, the heroes, Kuki and the others, were made to dance in their game, and the gods never intended to return them to their own world. To save the human race from the demon race, in other words to win the upcoming war, is the result of the gods pulling the strings behind the stage in the first place. The heroes themselves were only interesting pieces they had gathered without any real reason. Rather, they only thought it was more appropriate to start a new game using the heroes. However, for Rinku, there was no reason to pointedly explain this to Kuki and the other students. He wasn't interested with what his classmates wanted to do, and it would also only be a hassle for him. Even if he told him, that man who believed that justice always laid with the majority wouldn't believe him. Because he and Yoma were alone, between the words of a boy who had changed drastically and words that requested to save the majority, he didn't even need to think about who they would trust. Rather, because many people believe and worship Ahit, who he mentions is actually a woman, unlike what the murals have depicted her as. He'd only be mocked and criticized. Because of that, neither Rinku or Yoma didn't want to become related to Kuki in the least. However, by coincidence upon coincidence, it resulted in them meeting Aiko. Rinku himself knew Aiko's main principles always centered around her students. In other words, regardless of the circumstances of this other world, she would calmly make a decision for the sake of her students. Following that, judging from the attitudes of his classmates today, and how they yearned for Japan, if it was Aiko, surely her words would be able to influence them. Those were Rinku's thoughts. Although, he didn't know how her influence would change their actions. With this information, if the movement of Kuki and the others became different from what the gods intended, they'd surely put much more attention towards Kuki and the others. Rinku already knew that his and especially Yoma's existence would stand out like a sore thumb when he journeyed to conquer the great dungeons, and there was the possibility of receiving interference from the gods. That's why, by indirectly passing the information using someone they trust, he could rearrange the actions of Kuki and the others. Thus, he could delay being noticed by the gods. His only objective was to draw attention away from his party. In addition, without relying on the gods, Rinku's aim was to search for different ways for them to return. Furthermore, just like the liberators, he wanted to show Kuki and the others how their original allies became manipulated enemies. It's his intention to plant the wedge of distrust towards those gods. In the first place, he was only able to think of this idea because of the coincidental meeting with Aiko, so Rinku never expected anything out of it. For Rinku, there was no grudge nor hatred towards his classmates. He was just indifferent towards them. If they could be used, then he'd use them, and he'd leave them alone if they didn't seem useful. That's why he didn't disclose this information only by chance. However, he's unable to confirm how Yoma felt towards them. Having heard the truth of this world from Rinku, Aiko was dumbfounded. It was not known if she truly understood it. Processing this information, no matter what kind of ideas she got, it still took her more time. Rinku, well, that's all. That's what I came to know from the depths of the abyss. I'll leave what to do after knowing this to you. It's okay to think of it as just nonsense, and it's also okay to move into action if you think it's the truth. Just do as you want to. Aiko, Rinku, don't tell me to deal with those mad gods. You began your journey. Rinku, hell no. We feel from the bottom of our hearts that it doesn't matter what happens to this world. We are only searching for a method to return. That's why we went on a journey. The reason I'm telling you this is because it seems like it'd be convenient to do so, that's all. Aiko wore an indescribably subtle expression because he snorted at her question. Although she was relieved he didn't rashly poke his head into danger, she couldn't help but frown as a teacher because of how easily he said they could cast the others away. But she herself also made her students her first priority in this world, so she couldn't say anything back. As a result, she tried to change the topic with a subtle expression. Aiko, do you believe in that? Rinku, that's so. The great dungeons are the keys. It's okay if you search for it if they interest you. Once you exceed the 100th level of Orcus, you'll happily find the real great dungeon. First of all, by looking at your appearances today, you'll immediately die when you go there. It's out of the question if you can't ignore the pressure of that level. Aiko was reminded of the pressure that gushed out from Yoma at dinner time. Following that, she opened her eyes filled with complex feelings of sympathy, admiration, and other various feelings when she thought again about the harsh conditions he must have lived through. For a while, their silence continued. The room was filled with silence. Rinku was certain the information was received after looking at Aiko's appearance. And because he had no more business, he immediately turned his heels and walked towards the door. Behind him, Aiko told him about a certain student she remembered when they talked about the Orcus dungeon. Aiko, Kaori still hasn't given up on either of you. Rinku stopped walking because of the unexpected words from Aiko. Then, Aiko spoke softly with Rinku's back in front of her. Aiko, although everyone believed you were both dead, she was the only one who didn't give up on you boys. Before she confirms it with her own eyes, she believes you are still alive. Even now, she's still fighting in the Orcus Great Dungeon. Even though Kuki and the others are only going to the dungeon for training, her only purpose is to search for you too. Rinku, is she okay? After a long silence, Rinku asked Aiko. Rinku, who took an indifferent attitude towards them, began to ask about another with words of concern. Aiko, who discovered that the original Rinku still existed, displayed a joyful expression. Aiko, why yes. Although the Orcus Great Dungeon is a dangerous place, her ability has developed well, and she continues to conquer the dungeon. Sometimes letters come from her. Are you curious about her? Rinku then cut her off, back to his cold demeanor. Rinku, good, for your sake it better stay that way. If anything happens to her, I'm not sure how he'd react. Aiko was shocked by his words, unable to understand this vague warning. Aiko, what do you? Rinku, sensei, I can already guess the situation from the attitude of the others today. The cause of me falling in battle against the behemoth, you think it was just an accident? Right. Aiko, that's, yes. Some magic went out of control and resulted in accidental friendly fire. Rinku, friendly fire, huh? That's the cover-up. That was a magic bullet hit its targets. Aiko, targets. Aiko's expression said she couldn't understand what he meant. But, Rinku left words that mercilessly pushed Aiko's worry further. Rinku, it means, a classmate was trying to kill me and Yoma. Aiko was stunned and her face paled. Rinku, I only know that the culprit is someone related to Kaori. It's someone who's able to kill another person out of envy. Because she is still okay, it's good to advise her to be careful of an attack from behind. After leaving this message, Rinku went out of the room. Chapter 35, Northern Mountain Range Area. With the waning moonlight, the eastern sky began to lit up. The party completed their travel preparations, and soon they would leave the Water Ferry Inn. In their hands were packaged rice balls that could be eaten as they move. Even though it was still early in the morning, no one wore unpleasant faces as Foss prepared their breakfast. It was just as expected of a high-class inn. Its management was admired even by the party, as they thanked him without reserve once they received the breakfast. Within the morning mist, the party faced towards Ull's northern gate. There was a highway that stretched from this place to the northern mountain range area. It would take at least a full day by horse, but they would arrive in 3 to 4 hours using the magic-driven two-wheeler. It was the 5th day since they had lost contact with Wulkudeta and his party, who had gone to investigate northern mountain range area. Survival was hopeless. Rinku's also thought Wul and his party's odds of survival were low, but there was still a chance. Ilwa's image of Rinku would climb to a pinnacle if he brought him back alive, which was why he began searching as soon as possible. Fortunately, the weather was good. An ideal day to search for someone. With sounds of activity beginning to resound inside the buildings, they advanced towards the northern gate, and could finally see the gate. He narrowed his eyes because he could sense signs of people near the northern gate. They didn't move or anything, but only hung around the gate. What he saw through the morning mist were Aiko and the 6 students. Rinku, although I can guess what you want, let me hear it anyway. What are you doing? The party looked at Aiko and the students with half-opened eyes. For a moment, Aiko twitched from the pressure in the atmosphere, but she still faced them with a firm attitude. After having a discussion, the students, Sonobe Yuka, Sugawara Taiko, Miyazaki Nana, Tamaya Sushi, Aikawa Noboru, and Kawahara Akira, drew near Aiko. Aiko, we're also going. You're searching for missing people, right? It's better to have more people. Rinku, no. I am okay with you going. But, I refuse to go together. Aiko, why? Rinku, simply because our pace is different. We don't want to match your slow speed. If one were to look closely, they would notice that there were several horses readied behind Aiko and the others. For a moment they thought, was it because they cannot ride horses? As they doubted Rinku. Since it was trivial, he just let it go through their heads. No matter whether he could ride it or not, its speed couldn't compare to the magic-driven two-wheeler, after all. However, the virtual leader of Aiko's royal guard who loved her, Sonobe Yuka, snapped at Rinku's objection. Apparently, she had forgotten her debt and intimidation from Yoma yesterday because of the strength of her love towards Aiko. Yuka, wait, how could you say that? Even if Nagumo doesn't think well of us, there's no need to involve Ai-chan-sensei. As Yuka began to complain to Rinku, Yoma spoke up, biting the fleshy part of his thumb before he turned to Rinku. Yoma, are you still as weak as you are annoying? Either way, Rinku we're just gonna have to show them, better than explaining. Rinku, sounds fine to me. Yuka turned to Yoma. That comment reminded her of Yoma saving her life in the labyrinth before him and Rinku had fallen. A small blush appears on her face momentarily before she begins to freak out over Yoma biting his thumb, causing blood to pour onto his hand. Yuka, Ryouma! Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. What are you doing? Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. Suddenly, a big bike appeared from the void. Aiko and the students could only let out stupefied looks. Then seconds afterwards, Yoma slams his palm onto the ground, causing a smoke cloud to appear, and as the smoke cleared, Aiko and the students saw Yoma sitting on a giant four-winged bird with the exact same eyes as Yoma, only adding to their stupefied expressions. Rinku, do you understand now? Yesterday Yoma told you that we absolutely don't care about whatever you guys want to do. That's why there's no need to snarl at me. It's just like I said before, our speed is different. The magic-driven two-wheeler's profound form next to the giant monstrous bird, and maybe because it was an existence that didn't belong in this different world, made Aiko and the onlooking students speechless. Aiko stood in front of Rinku and Yoma. She wanted to tag along with her students' party no matter what it took. She had two reasons. One was to search for the truth about what Rinku said last night. Aiko couldn't just overlook the words, a classmate was trying to kill them, so she wanted to find out if it was the truth or just their misunderstanding. If it was the truth, she wanted to know what they were going to do. She wanted to hear more details from them for the sake of avoiding any accidents that might happen in the future. Once the search ended, she didn't know when she'd be able to meet them again, so she mustn't miss this chance. The other reason was, because Shimizu Yukitoshi was currently still missing. Although they had tried to find any scrap of information without leaving even a stone unturned, there were no sightings of him in any of the nearby towns and villages. However, because there was no one living in the northern mountain range area in the first place, she remembered there was no information gathered there. Even if it was on his own accord or by accident, she naturally never thought he'd enter the northern mountain range area. But with the thought he'd left on his own, she thought of searching for Shimizu's trail while Rinku, Yoma, and their party looked for the missing people. By the way, it was partly a coincidence that Sonobe and the other students were here. Aiko had wanted to go to the gate earlier than the duo, in order to ambush them, so she tried to leave the inn before dawn, only to be seen by Sonobe Yuka who was going to the toilet. Because Aiko equipped herself with traveling gear and tried to leave at such an unreasonable time, Sonobe Yuka of Aiko's bodyguards questioned her without letting her tell a lie. As the result, because they couldn't just leave Aiko to the changed Rinku and Yoma, and partly because wanted to see Yoma a tad bit more, with the belief she wouldn't see him much afterwards. Sonobe woke up all of the students and tried to join the search mission. It should be noted that they had left a letter to the knights, telling them to watch the house, since it seemed like they would only strike up more trouble if they went with Hajime and his party. Though it wasn't known how they'd react. Aiko drew near Rinku and whispered her decision to him. Rinku moved his face close to Aiko's because he didn't want the contents and only the contents to be heard by others, but when he looked carefully he noticed she used thick makeup to conceal dark shadows. Surely, she was hardly able to sleep having heard his story. Aiko, Rinku, because I am a teacher, it's necessary to hear the details from both you and Yoma. That's why, I won't let you go until you tell me everything. I'll chase you if you try to run away. Won't that be troublesome? I don't care if you tell me while we are traveling or when we are searching, so will you spare some time? If you do that, then it'll be as Yoma said, it'll be goodbye after this town, for the time being. Rinku could see the light of determination in Aiko's eyes, and he slightly regretted his last words from last night resulted in this failure. He understood Aiko's ability to take action, although she's often idle. If he tried to deceive her or run away, she'd likely use the guard knights to search for him. He averted his gaze from Aiko and looked up at the sky, which was becoming more and more bright. Without throwing away the possibility of Will's survival, he regretted time had passed while they argued. Rinku let out a deep sigh. He admitted that he'd just reaped what he'd sown, and faced Aiko again. Rinku, okay. I'll let you go with us. Even though I say that, I don't have time to speak with you. Aiko, I don't care. I only want to hear it from your mouth. Rinku, geez, Muz Aiko, you won't give up at all. Whatever and wherever, always a teacher, Aiko, of course. Yoma, we are her favorite former students after all. Aiko, you both are still my students. Aiko stuck out her chest with a joyful look when Rinku gave up. Because it seemed the negotiations had gone well, the students showed relieved looks. Yue, Rinku, are you going to bring them? Rinku, this person is a teacher even here. She will not compromise anything regarding her students. If I just leave her, it'll absolutely become troublesome in the future. Shia, she is a good teacher who thinks of her students. Because Rinku had given up, Yue and Shia were surprised and asked him. Following that, having heard Rinku's words accompanied with a bitter smile along with Yoma masterfully lightening the mood again, the eyes with which they looked at Aiko had changed slightly. They were filled with some respect. Even Rinku thought Aiko's attitude as their teacher, which couldn't be shaken at all, was not a bad thing. For example, she didn't find any value in categorizing the classmates and students, so he thought of her as an adult who should be respected. Shinobi, but this bike can only hold 3 people, right? What should we do? What Shinobi pointed out was the truth. It was out of the question in regards to time, to match the horse's speed, and it was impossible to leave Yue or Shia behind to bring Aiko instead. Reluctantly, Rinku put the magic-driven 2-wheeler into treasure box, and pulled out the magic-driven 4-wheeler in its stead. Rinku made it vanish, and at the same time a big object appeared, probably because they knew he'd used an artifact. Aiko and the students were not surprised at all. Having seen the current Rinku, who on Earth could imagine he or hell, even Yoma were once called incompetent. Rinku, those who are unable to get on will be in the carrier. Rinku then turned up at Yoma. Rinku, even then, I still don't have enough room, one of you have to go with Yoma. Yoma, really? Damn, that sucks, well let's see. Rinku, you're not choosing. Otherwise we'll be here all day. Shia began to jump up and down excitedly. Shia, ooh, me. Rinku, absolutely not. Shinobi. Go with Yoma. Shinobi blushed at Rinku's command, not knowing what to say. She didn't actually expect she'd have the moment to be next to Yoma. He then lowered the giant bird he will ride on down to where everyone else is at. Yoma then holds his hand out. Yoma, come on Budget Robin, grab a hold and hop on. Shinobi, Budget, Robin. Rinku, there's no point in asking questions, just accept the nickname and hop on. Shinobi looked between both Yoma and Rinku before she reluctantly grabbed onto Yoma's hand and allowed him to lift her up onto the giant bird. She was quite surprised that he did it with relative ease and showed no signs of struggling, even a little. Shia, no fair. Why does a random girl get to ride with Yoma and not me? Rinku, shut the hell up and get in the jeep. They moved forward on the road, expanding straight into the northern mountain range area using the Hummer-like magic-driven 4-wheeler and Yoma's bird to scout out the area. Even though the highway was a bad road, thanks to the suspension and ground transmutation feature it shared with the 2-wheeler, most of the impact was nulled. Naturally, the male students, aboard the hard metal luggage carrier attached to the back, didn't seem to be in discomfort. By the way, although there was the treasure box, the reason he specifically installed the carrier was because it was a set with the Gatling that would be used while driving. It was his aspiration. A small commitment from Rinku. For the seating inside the vehicle, Rinku naturally sat in the driver's seat, while Aiko sat at his side and Yue was next to her. Aiko sat beside Rinku for the sake of hearing his story. Although Aiko seemed to not have told it to the other students, she wanted to hear about it sooner. Originally, the seat next to Rinku belonged to Yue, and occasionally Yoma if he was too tired to summon any of his creatures. But Yue already knew the contents of the story Rinku would tell, so reluctantly, she gave her seat to Aiko. But Aiko and Yue were small, so there was still a considerable amount of space in the seat. But the one who felt the most uncomfortable was Shia. She had been placed next to Sugawara, and she interrogated her about her relationship with Yoma. Love between different races in another world was something female high schoolers wouldn't miss hearing. She was so curious that she had repeatedly asked Shia, and the flustered Shia tried her best to answer their questions. On the other side, Rink and Aiko's conversation also reached its climax. Having heard the situation in detail about that time from Rinku, while she knew the possibility of magic being fired intentionally was high, Aiko was still unable to believe it and was troubled by it. When he heard her, Rinku only snorted as his reply. For now, he and Yoma already knew it was someone like Hiyama, and although he only said this was one of the possibilities. After all, Aiko wouldn't be able to arrive at such a conclusion, and even if the culprit could be specified, how could she restore the mind of someone who attempted murder? How could one compensate for that? She was troubled, with those thoughts on her mind. She groaned because she was troubled by this, but due to the soft seat and vibrating vehicle inviting her to sleep, Aiko started off on her journey to the world of dreams. Before she was aware of it, her body slipped until she fell onto Rinku's lap. Normally, he'd send her flying because it's a hindrance, but because he felt it awkward to act rude toward Aiko, he hesitated over what to do, then he decided to leave her as is. After all, Rinku's information was the main cause of Aiko's sleep deprivation. So if it's just this, he felt that it couldn't be helped, as he displayed unusual generosity. Yue, Rinku is gentle to Aiko. Rinku, well, it is someone I'm indebted to, so something like this is okay. Yue, fun. Rinku, Yue. Yue doesn't respond to him. Rinku, Yue, please don't ignore me. Yue, next, I will use the lap pillow. Rinku, fine. Even though Aiko was still lap-pillowed, Rinku and Yue were able to enter a world of their own. In the back seat, the female high schoolers watched them while going kya kya, followed by a sulking rabbit-eared girl. From now on, they were entering a dangerous zone where unknown accidents might occur, but no one thought about it as they made such a noise. Outside of the car, on top of the bird with Yoma and Shinobi, Yoma was enjoying the view, not giving much attention to Shinobi, almost as if he forgot she was there. She decided to finally speak up. Shinobi, Yoma. Yoma, what the? Where the hell did you come from? Yoma jumped, surprised that Shinobi was behind him, leaving her dumbfounded. Before she spoke up, Yoma cut her off, laughing and waving his hand. Yoma, nah, I'm just kidding. What's on your mind? Shinobi shook her head to regain her composure. Shinobi, I wanted to say, thank you, for saving everyone, and me, in the labyrinth. Yoma tilted his head. Yoma, what the hell are you talking about? Shinobi froze. Shinobi, the day you went missing, you saved me, and said I was weak. Yoma, sorry, I don't know what you're talking about, I don't really remember unimportant stuff like that. Shinobi gasped softly, but she put her head down and smiled softly, she thought to herself. Shinobi, either way Yoma, thank you. Several mountains extended with altitudes ranging from 1,000 to 8,000 meters. Plants and trees were somehow able to grow there. It was a mysterious place with a scattered environment. The color would make one remember the mountains of Japan in autumn, and the other area was filled with trees with fresh green leaves, just like in midsummer, but there were also places with withered trees in contrast. Moreover, even if one could see past the mountain range, another mountain range stretched out beyond it. There were more and more of them to the north. Currently 4 such mountain ranges were confirmed, and beyond that was a completely unknown area. As to how far it went, a certain adventurer aimed to cross the 5th mountain range. However, demonic beasts got stronger and stronger with every passing mountain range, and in the end, there was no sign of success. Incidentally, the highest mountain was the God Mountain. Currently, the place the party and the others had first arrived in when they came into this world was 1,600 kilometers east of the God Mountain. The vivid colors of red and yellow of the fresh leaves on the trees made them easy on the eyes. If a knowledgeable person were to look carefully, he would find spices and edible plants in the area. They were what enriched Hull Town, a truly bountiful mountain. Rinku had stopped the 4-wheeler at the foot of the mountain, and were charmed by the artistic display of nature's magnificent colors for a while. One of the girls let out a ho tilde. Some time ago, Aiko was apologizing while blushing, after making the blunder of sleeping in a student's lap. But having seen the fresh scenery, she succeeded in placing the black history into the far recesses of her mind. Rinku also wanted to slowly appreciate this, so he put the 4-wheeler back into the treasure box, and pulled out certain things in its stead. Those were imitation models of birds which spanned 30 centimeters each, and a ring with a small crystal embedded on it. Each of the models had a grey crystal buried in a part of their heads. Rinku put on the ring, took out 4 identical models, and slowly threw them into the air. With that, one would assume they'd fall due to gravity. However, these fake birds were floating in place. Aiko and the students let out an "ah." The 4 mechanical birds began to turn around on their spots and flew towards the mountain as Yoma and Sonobi finally descended. Yoma, so you're stealing ideas from now Rinku? Aiko, and those are. Having seen the model birds flying away without any sound, Aiko represented the other students and inquired something of him. Rinku answered her with unmanned reconnaissance planes, and just like the vehicles and gun, they were items that were out of place in this different world. The imitation model of birds called unmanned reconnaissance planes was something Hajime made in reference to the remotely operated golem knights from Raisin's Great Dungeon. They were also produced using the materials he got there. Using creation magic, he granted minerals gravity magic because he didn't have the aptitude for using the magic himself, and they became minerals capable of neutralizing gravity as they floated. And thus, gravity stones were created. Furthermore, the induction stones which used to control the golem knights were used. In addition, farsight crystals were also installed in each part of their heads. The mineral used in the eyes of golem knights were farsight stones. Similar to induction stones, it was a mineral capable of reflecting scenes witnessed by other fragments of the crystal, regardless of distance, so long as the same type of magical power was supplied to them. It seemed this was what Milady used to determine the detailed position of the party. Rinku installed the farsight crystal inside his magic eye, and he became capable of seeing scenery the unmanned reconnaissance planes could see. In the first place, there's a limit to the processing performance of a human's brain. Using 4 simultaneously was the limit, allowing them to move around in the sky. It's a complete mystery as to how Milady was able to operate 50 golems at once. Tentatively, his brain's processing performance had been boosted when he awakened the light speed. If he only had to control one plane, he could do precise movements. Moreover, when he uses light speed, he could make 7 planes do precise movements within a certain time limit. This time, he took out the unmanned reconnaissance planes because being able to search from the air is useful, since the scope of search was too vast. Having watched the unmanned reconnaissance planes fly far away, Aiko and the students tried to stop being surprised by Rinku's actions. However, it was a vow that might never be fulfilled. The party and the others advanced into the mountain using the same path used by the adventurers. The sighting information of demonic beasts were just slightly beyond the other side of mountain path. It's in the vicinity of the 6th and 7th mountain. Because of that, Will's party of adventurers should be investigating around those parts. Having thought of this, they quickly advanced through the mountain path at a high pace, after Rinku released the unmanned reconnaissance planes in that area. The party and the others reached the 6th mountain in almost an hour, and stopped. The reason was because it was necessary to search for any traces around the area. Aiko and her students had less physical strength than what Rinku had expected, so it was necessary to take a break. Naturally, Aiko and her students' statuses were originally several times higher than the average people of this world, so they didn't get exhausted until they climbed the 6th mountain. It's just that the movement speed of Rinku, Yoma, and the others were just too fast. That's why they climbed the mountain using all their might, and when they noticed it, their physical strength was exhausted and their legs became wobbly. Aiko and her students desperately gasped for breath on all fours, and the 2 guys glanced at them with a somewhat troubled look. In any case, they had decided it was necessary to search the surroundings, as they went to the nearby river to let them rest. He was able to determine the location because of the information from the unmanned reconnaissance planes. After stating the location to Aiko and her students, who were still breathing roughly, the party advanced towards the river. The probability of Will's party having rested there was also high. With Yue and Shia in the lead, they strayed from the mountain path and onto the mountain. Rustle, rustle. The sound of fallen leaves was enjoyable as they continued to walk between the trees, and before long they could hear the sound of a river. It was a sound pleasing to the ears. Shia's ears swayed happily. Finally the party reached the river. It was at a bigger scale compared to a small river. Shia, who held the highest search ability, observed the surroundings while Rinku once again used the unmanned reconnaissance planes to search for any presences, and there was no sign of demonic beasts nearby. They relaxed for now. The quartet and the others were sitting on the rock in the riverbank, then they talked about their search plans. Yue took off her shoes and put her feet into the river after saying, just a little. It was her selfishness to enjoy the moment. Rinku overlooked it because Aiko and her students still hadn't caught up to them. He's a man who spoiled Yue. Shia also took this chance. Yoma, Rinku buddy, you spoil us too much. Rinku, us. What makes you think you and Shia get any favors from me? Yoma, cause deep down you love me. Shia, hey, what about me? Having thought of a possibility, they moved upstream along the riverbank. Rinku moved the unmanned reconnaissance planes upstream while he looked at Yue, Pasha, playing with the river water with her bare feet. Although Shia was also barefooted, she only put them in the water. The feeling of the river flowing seemed to tickle her. Aiko and her students, who finally regained their breaths, arrived. They stayed in place as they stared at the quartet. However, the 3 male students shouted, "Is this heaven?" with sparkling eyes as they saw the barefooted Yue and Shia, while the female students returned to look at them with cold eyes. It made the male students shudder. When they noticed the gazes from Tamai and the others, Yue and Shia got out of the river. Aiko and her students were diligently replenishing their moisture in the riverbank. Because of the displeasing gazes from Tamai and the male students a while ago, Yue and Shia returned slight glares, and the male students trembled as they averted their gazes. Having seen such a spectacle, Aiko and the female students looked at Rinku and Yoma with warm eyes. Especially Shinobi and the female students. Since they had heard various things from Shia, they wore very annoying expressions. Aiko, those 2 really treasures Yue and Shia. Aiko said such things while smiling. Rinku wanted to say something, but he was stopped by Yoma and just shrugged his shoulders when he saw the depressed Shinobi and the other male students. Yue was the one who took action in his stead. As if it were the most natural thing in the world, she suddenly sat on Rinku's lap. She was so pleased that she entrusted all of her weight to Rinku. It could also be called her proof of trust. Shia, who started feeling lonely seeing Rinku and Yue being all lovey-dovey, ran up to Yoma who was lying down on the ground. He was looking up at the clouds, but his blindfold made people think he was sleeping, again. Shia, Yoma. Tilda, can I come up and snuggle with you? Tilda. Yoma, do you want to die today, Tilda? Shia, no. Yoma, then there's your answer, Tilda. However, Rinku's expression suddenly sharpened in the next moment. Rinku. That is. Yue, did you find something? Having heard Rinku's muttering while he was looking far into the distance, Yue asked him. Because of his appearance, Aiko and the others blinked their eyes wondering what happened. Rinku, on the rivers upstream. Is that a shield? Also, there are bags. It looks like they're still new. It might be a hit. Yoma, Yue, Shia, let's go. The party harmoniously stood up and began to prepare for departure. Aiko and the students actually still wanted to rest, and although they knew they were overdoing it, they couldn't just stand still once they saw that Rinku had found some clues. They laboriously raised their still exhausted waists and once again desperately tried to follow the party, who were advancing upstream with blistering speed. At the location the party arrived at, just as he confirmed with the unmanned reconnaissance planes, small round shields made of metal and bags were scattered around. However, there were dents on the round shields, and the bags were torn up in the middle with their strings pulled out. The party carefully examined their surroundings. Then they found some nearby trees with their barks peeled off of them. They were roughly at the 2 meters of height. It was apparent that the bark was in such state because something had scratched it off, and at that height, it clearly wasn't the work of humans. Rinku instructed Shia to use her search ability to the fullest, while also using his own perception skill as they approached the barkless trees. Advancing ahead, they found signs of combat one after another. There were trees and branches that were broken in half. There were also plants that had been trampled, and furthermore, there were fragments of blades and blood scattered around. Every time they found such traces, the expressions on Aiko and the students' faces stiffened. For a while, they chased after the signs of combat, and Shia suddenly found something shining. Shia, Rinku, isn't this a pendant? Yoma, damn, looks like we missed the party. Rinku, NN. It's probably something they left behind. Let me confirm it. After he washed off the dirt from the pendant he had received from Shia, he noticed it was not just a pendant but also a locket. He removed the clasp and saw what was inside. It was a woman's photograph. Perhaps, she was someone's lover or wife. Even though it was not a significant clue, it was not an old one but a recent one. It could belong to someone from the adventurers' party. That's why it'd be kept for now. Afterwards, they found more articles of the deceased, or so they called them, but they only collected items that would allow one to identify their owners. Having searched around for a while, eventually day turned into night, and the time for them to set up camp was approaching. Even now, there were no signs of life aside from the wild animals. Although they were cautious because of how Wool and his party encountered and were attacked by demonic beasts, there were no sign of demonic beasts in their immediate surroundings. Their current location was between the 8th and 9th mountain. From what was said about crossing the mountains, Usually, they would encounter one or two demonic beasts, so Rinku and the others could feel the eeriness of this situation. After a while, the unmanned reconnaissance planes once again found a location with abnormalities. There were leftovers of great destruction 300 meters to the east. Rinku urged everyone to rush to that location. There was a big river. A small waterfall could be seen upstream, and the volume of water was immense, with a violent current. Originally, it was likely to flow straight towards the foot of the mountain, but currently, there was a large and small river branching along the way. It was as though it was gouged by a laser or something, from the flank. The reason they had such impressions was because the gouged part was a straight line, while the surrounding trees and ground were scorched. Furthermore, as if they had received a big impact, a lot of trees were partly broken and thrown tens of meters to the side. On the riverside, there were big footprints measuring more than 30 centimeters. Rinku, it seems the real combat happened here. These footprints were of large bipedal demonic beasts. Surely, there were demonic beasts called brutal beyond the second mountain after this. But, the way the ground was gouged. What Rinku described as brutals was something similar to the orcs and ogres in RPG. Although they didn't have high intelligence, they took action as group. Because they had a weaker version of the peculiar magic, Vajra, called Strong Wall, they were recognized as quite powerful enemies. They usually descend into the second mountain of the mountain range, but these demonic beasts never came into towns. In addition, they didn't have any attacks that could make such river tributaries. Rinku thought of the brutal as he observed the footprints. He hesitated whether to go upstream or downstream. Although Will's party had likely to escape upstream, he thought it would be hard for them to run upstream after such combat. He doubted that they would physically and mentally run further from town. Rinku decided to direct the unmanned reconnaissance planes upstream while they head downstream. Even though the Brutal's footprints were on the riverside, the possibility of Will and his party jumping into the river was high. If so, he thought they'd likely be swept away because of physical exhaustion. The others also agreed with Rinku's speculations, and descended towards downstream on the riverside. Afterwards, they encountered a much more splendid waterfall compared to the one from before. Hajime and the others nimbly descended from the cliff on the side of the waterfall and landed on the vicinity of the basin. The refreshing wind peculiar to a waterfall healed their minds and bodies which were exhausted from a day of searching. Then, Rinku felt a reaction from his sign perception. Rinku, this is Yue, Rinku. Yoma, shush. Yue immediately reacted and asked him, which resulted in Yoma shushing her. For a while, Rinku concentrated while closing his eyes. Following that, while slowly opening his eyes, he let out a surprised voice. Rinku, oi, seriously. The sign perception picked up something. From the feeling, I can say it's a human. The location is in the interior of Waterfall's Basin. Shia, you mean there are survivors? Rinku nodded towards Shia's words of confirmation. He answered, only one person, when Yue asked for the number of people. Aiko and her students were also surprised. It was something natural. Although the odds of survival were not zero, they actually didn't expect any at all. It was the 5th day since Will's party had gone missing. It was a miracle for even one of them to remain alive. Rinku, Yue, please. While watching the waterfall basin, Rinku called Yue. Yue was able to guess Rinku's intentions from just those few words, and she shook her right hand as the magic's trigger. Yue, wave castle, wind wall. Then, the water in the waterfall and its basin began to split in two just like the Red Sea in Moses' legend. Moreover, the scattered water was perfectly brushed off by the wall of wind. It was the result of water magic making a high-pressure wall of water called Wave Castle, and wind magic called Wind Wall. Without chanting, magic of two different attributes were activated at the same time. Having seen how they were used, Aiko and her students, although they didn't remember how many times they had done it, dropped their jaws in astonishment. Surely, the Hebrew people also displayed such expressions. Because her magic power was not infinite, Rinku urged Aiko and the others on, as he led them into the interior of the waterfall basin's cave. The cave they entered immediately curved upward, and they arrived at quite a large cavity. Water and light poured down from the ceiling, and the fallen water flowed into the waterpool below. The reason it didn't overflow was surely because they continued flowing inside. They discovered a man lying down in the innermost part of the cave. When they arrived at the man's side, they confirmed that he was a young man, around 20 years of age. Although he looked like a noble, he currently looked pale and displayed the complexion of a dead person. However, there was no large injury, and because there was food remaining inside his bag, he was simply sleeping. His bad complexion was surely related to how he was the only one here. Having seen the anxious Aiko, and because Rinku wanted to immediately identify the young man's identity, he used his artificial arm, while restraining his power to the limit, to flick the sleeping young man's forehead. He screamed as he woke up. The young man writhed while covering his forehead with both hands. Aiko and her students shuddered because of the powerful and merciless forehead flick. Rinku ignored Aiko and the students, and approached the young man with teary eyes to ask his name. Yoma, damn, that was a good idea. Rinku, are you Will Kudeta? The third son of Count Kudeta. Will, you are, just how on earth did you guys get here? Because the young man only blinked as he couldn't grasp the situation, Rinku once again made a stance to flick his forehead and slowly aimed at it. Rinku, answer my question. I'll increase the power by 20% every time you say something other than the answer. Will, Rinku, are you Will Kudeta? Will, yes. That's right. I am Will Kudeta. Yes. For a moment, when the young man hesitated in answering, Rinku's eyes gave off a dangerous light, and he immediately thrust out his left hand. The panicked young man immediately announced his name. Apparently, he was truly the person in question. He seemed to have miraculously survived. Rinku, I see. I am Rinku. Rinku Kagura. I have come here on the request of the head of Ern's branch guild, Ilwa Chang. It's good that you're alive. Will, Ilwa. Is that so? Once again, I am indebted to that person. I am thankful to you. You must be a remarkable person to receive a request directly from Ilwa-san. Will voiced gratitude with respectful eyes. It seemed he didn't mind the forehead flick with unbelievable power from a little while ago. If so, he might be an unexpectedly good person. A great difference than a pig from somewhere. After that, having introduced everyone, they heard the story of what happened to Will. This was the summary. 5 days ago, Will's party came to the vicinity of the upper part of Fifth Mountain using the mountain path just like Hajime and the others. Suddenly, they encountered 10 brutals. As expected, they couldn't win against the number of brutals they encountered, so Will's party tried to withdraw. But, the number of attacking brutals kept increasing, and they were by the river of the Sixth Mountain when they noticed it. Then, the brutals encircled them, so for the sake of escaping from the encirclement, 2 people, trifling and unimportant soldiers, were sacrificed after that. When they arrived at a big river, despair appeared. It appeared to be a jet black dragon. As soon as Will's party came along the river bank, the black dragon let out breath, and Will was blown off into the river by the attack. From what he saw while being swept away, 1 person vanished because of the breath, while the other 2 were attacked from both sides, by brutals from the back and the dragon from the front. Will fell into the basin of the waterfall after he was swept away as is. He went into the cave he had found by chance, and he seemed to have been hiding here ever since. Somehow, it sort of resembled what may or may not have happened to a certain someone. Will, as he told them that, was feeling proud of it, and then suddenly started to sob. It was not something unreasonable. The senior adventurers taught him the know-how for adventurers and took care of him even though one of them wore a displeased face. Without confirming their safety, the pathetic him was only able to tremble in fear and wait for help to come. The him who felt relieved because his rescue came while his companions were dead. Various feelings continuously emerged and his tears overflowed. Will's wails echoed inside the cave. No one could say anything to him. Toward the Will who blamed himself with tears flowing down his face, they didn't know which words would be good for him. The students looked at Will with sorrowful expressions, while Aiko gently patted Will's back. Yue was expressionless as usual, while Shia looked troubled. But, at the moment Will found himself at a loss for words, an unexpected person moved. It was Rinku. Rinku approached Will and gripped Will's collar. He used his inhuman strength to hang him mid-air. Following that, towards the Will who was in pain because he couldn't breathe, Hajime spoke with an unexpectedly permeating voice. Yoma, oh no, he's Tilda. Rinku, what is wrong with wanting to live? What is wrong with being glad because you're alive? That wish and feeling are something natural and inevitable. Even more so because you're a human. Will, but I was. Rinku, even so, if you're worried about those who died, then continue to live. From now on keep living as you struggle, and struggle as if you're going to die. If you do that, someday, there might come a day when you understand the reason why you survived today. Even while crying, Will repeated Rinku's words in blank surprise. Rinku violently threw Will down. His words just now, more than half of them were directed towards himself. Will's situation was a little similar to his, and for him to belittle his own life was like saying, it's wrong for you to survive, towards Rinku, so he was inadvertently angered. Of course it was just his persecution complex. More than half of it was said on an outburst of anger, so it wasn't different from a child's tantrum. Even though he had seen through various things, Rinku was still a 17-year-old boy, and there was still more for him to learn. Rinku knew he had fallen into slight self-loathing. Having seen such a Rinku, Yue came to his side and grasped his hand tightly. Yue, it's okay, Rinku isn't wrong. Rinku, Yue. Yoma then walked up to him and wrapped his arm around him. Yoma, still as dramatic as always, Rinku buddy. Rinku, Yoma. Rinku, haha, of course. I'll keep on living no matter what might happen, so, don't leave me alone. They left Will, who was still talking to himself. Then Rinku and Yue created a world with just the two of them. He couldn't match Yue, and Rinku gently stroked Yue's cheek, while Yue was also being spoiled and let his hand stroke her cheek. Yoma smirked and backed off, giving him their space as he sat on a nearby rock. Not understanding what happened to cause such a development, Aiko and her students could only blink, while Shia watched Rinku and Yue and Yoma with half-opened eyes. The chaotic situation continued for a while, thanks to Hajimi's recklessness, and somehow everyone managed to regain their senses. The party then decided to immediately descend the mountain. There was still more than an hour before sunset, so if they hurried, they would likely reach the foot of the mountain by the time the sun set. Although they were concerned about the Brutals and the Jet Black Dragon, those were outside the party's mission. It was unthinkable to continue the investigation while having to protect those with low combat potential. Will also understood that he would just be a hindrance, so he understood that they must withdraw. Although the students insisted on continuing the investigation because of their slight sense of justice that came from the troubled townspeople, Aiko stubbornly refused to investigate because of the great danger the Black Dragon and Brutals posed. In the end, they descended the mountain. However, nothing proceeded smoothly. Once again, they were passionately welcomed when the party got out of the waterfall basin with Yue's magic. Letting out a low groan, with its whole body covered in jet black scales, its golden eyes glared at them in midair while fluttering its wings, it was the dragon.